Hello, I'm Laura Rogers, and welcome to my session. It's called Upgrade Your Skills, Modern Out-of-the-Box Approvals. Let's get started. A little bit about myself real quick. I am a Microsoft MVP, and I live in Birmingham, Alabama. My training company is called IW Mentor. I've written some SharePoint books over the years. I've got a blog, wonderlaura.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at wonderlaura. All right, here is a bit about our agenda today. We're going to talk about just quickly the concept of workflows and the fact that they are all over the place in our organizations. We're going to talk about those old out-of-the-box SharePoint workflows and the way we used to do things. We'll talk about out-of-the-box approval concepts, and then introduce Microsoft Flow and go talk about things we can do, easy ways we can create workflows and empower our end users to do them themselves. And then we'll go beyond out of the box and we'll talk a little bit about, touch on some real world scenarios and things that we can do in Microsoft Flow beyond what it offers out of the box once you start customizing them yourself. Workflows are everywhere. They are in our organization. They might be paper workflows where people print things out and pass them around. They might be online forms. They might be PDF files. But whether we like it or not, our workplace is full of workflows. And Microsoft has provided these great technologies that let us automate things and save your information workers some time and make their jobs much more efficient by automating some of their workflows and improving that accountability and improving the overall processes in your company. Do you remember those old retro, those old-fashioned SharePoint workflows that we used to do? So we had 2007, we had out-of-the-box browser-based workflows, and we had SharePoint Designer 2007. We had SharePoint 2010 workflows that we had some that were browser-based that you didn't need SharePoint Designer for, and some that we had this built-in task process designer that was a good way to automate some of those processes. And then in 2013, it still uses the 2010 out-of-the-box workflows in the browser. And then, of course, we had SharePoint Designer 2013. Aren't you glad that we've moved on and we don't need to use those anymore? All right, before we dig into Microsoft Flow, we're going to talk about some simple approval options, just what exists out of the box, just the very least common denominator, things that have been in there a while and things that you can, ways that you can empower your end users to quickly and easily do small approval processes. First of all, we have in every list and library, it's always been there, we have a setting called the content approval setting. And this is basically the ability to turn on moderation. There's also a new concept for having to do with very simple approvals. It's called request sign-off. And this uses Flow and an approval action, but doesn't actually require you to go to the Flow interface and configure anything or actually create a flow. It is a completely built-in flow that is not customizable. So those are our two very basic out-of-the-box approval options, and we'll dig a little bit more into those before we move on to moving beyond out of the box. All right, we have content approval. Again, it's been in there for years. It's available in all lists and libraries. This is moderation. It basically anytime an item is added or edited in that list or library, it's going to be set to pending, waiting to be approved. And then you have to have a certain level of permission, a permission to be able to approve things in that list or library. And the moderators aren't necessarily going to automatically get a notification, but they can just set up those good old SharePoint alerts to be notified about things happening in that list or library. Now, request sign-off is this new out-of-the-box concept. It is turned on by default in both lists and libraries, and it is something that you are going to manually trigger when you select an item. The process is very simple. You select one item or one file, you click to start that request sign-off flow, and you pick one or more approvers, and you write a message and go. And now take a look. This is what the email looks like that the person receives. They have some simple buttons directly in the email that allow them to not only click approve or reject, or they can actually type comments in the email and submit it as if it was a form. When they respond, their response goes directly back into the workflow and the workflow proceeds. And that's all there is to it. All right, there's another setting in your flow drop-down box in your library besides request sign-off. It's called configure flows. So let's talk a little bit, let's dig a little bit more into what exactly that means. First of all, you have to have permissions to be able to manage that list, to be able to actually do the configuration. Everyone will see the button, but you have to have configure manage list to be able to actually change the setting. The setting is basically a toggle switch that says, do you want approvals in this library on or off? Now that's a little confusing. So what exactly does that mean? So then it has a section below that says select the approval mode for this library. And you have to choose one of the following: a request sign off or content approval. Request sign off is that new out of the box flow, and content approval is the old school thing that's been around for a really long time. So what exactly happens when you change that setting? All right, for the do you want approvals in this library, if that toggle switch is turned to off, the request sign off option will not show anymore in your flow drop-down box. That's all that toggle switch does, is turn request sign off off. Now, when it comes to the approval mode and what the two options, request sign off or content approval, what exactly do those do? So I created a table here to explain it. When you choose request sign off, it turns the content approval setting in your list off. And you still have the request sign off in the drop down, and you can create and use any other flows. And you can't use sign off and content approval together. When content approval list setting is on, then your content approval is on, that old school setting that's been there forever, but then your request sign off drop down is off. And either way, you still can create or use any other flows. And either way, you still can't use sign off and content approval together. So that is what that is all about. Now that we've established what that content approval does, what the request sign off does, and what some of those new settings are in your library, let's talk about that actual experience for end users when they are assigned the approvals, when they go through that experience of approving and rejecting things, getting those emails. So for end users, there's an approvals webpage. When you go to flow.microsoft.com, you go to Flow in your app launcher, or you go to your Flow app, mobile app, you're going to have an approvals page where you can see your received request, sent request, your history of approvals. You can create a new flow from there, and you can even look at the whole list of past approvals and filter and view those. And you can even optionally reassign approvals to other people. All right, now let's talk a little bit about Microsoft Flow itself and some of the still on the quick, easy side things that you can do within Flow beyond request sign-off. You can go to this Flow page, flow.microsoft.com, and you have this visual workflow creation platform. You are going to see the flows, the list of flows that you've created, and you're going to see team flows. And for each flow, you're going to be able to do things like view all the logs, share the flow with other people, make a copy of a flow, see analytics on that flow, and even run tests. All right, when it comes to flow design, what you're going to do is you can start with a blank flow, or you can start from a template. You can then pick a trigger, so you have to decide what's going to kick off your flow, what action happening is going to start the flow. And then from there, you build your flow out with multiple actions, conditions. You can even do looping and parallel branches when you get advanced. Here's an example of what the interface looks like for a fairly complex workflow. There are a lot of templates out there. So sort of between doing request sign-off, which is very simple, and starting a flow from scratch and building it yourself, the next step in between those is going to be templates. So templates are a great way to either get started and simply use what the template has, or use them as a learning tool and start creating a template and then dig around in it to see how certain things were done. We have templates for documents. Templates can even be used directly from within your list or library when you start creating a flow from there. You have a lot of different things you can do for documents, such as saving email attachments, copying files from one place to another, one environment to another, getting signatures, posting to Yammer. You can see these are a lot of examples of things that you can do just with files in SharePoint, and a lot of examples of interacting with other systems as well, as you can see here. There are also a lot of templates that you can do that you can use for SharePoint list items. And again, a lot of these are really useful if you just use what they have and just use it on one of your lists in your site, or by creating a bunch of flows using the templates and using them as a learning tool to look through. So as you can see, the templates are all here on the Flow site that can be searched, and there are categories, or from within your SharePoint site, from within a list or library, you can create a flow from the template there as well. And what it will do is it will create that template and take you over to the Flow interface. All right, it is time to level up. We've talked about content approval, very simple. We've talked about request sign-off. We've talked about some flow templates, again, very simple. And then beyond that is where we get to custom flows, where you can pretty much make them do whatever you want and interact with over 200 different services and databases. So let's go beyond out of the box and talk about what we can do when it comes to the best actions that are useful when it comes to approval processes, specifically in Flow. Approvals is the action that utilizes that approval interface on the Flow page and uses all those built-in approvals. Send email with options is a great one. It will send an email with a couple of buttons in it, and the end user will click to pick a specific option, and the flow will keep running from there, and you can make the flow do different things depending on what they picked. You can assign planner tasks to people, and Outlook tasks and Microsoft To Do are in there, but they only apply to the current person, so you can't actually assign things to other people from using those actions. And then we talked about content approval status earlier. You can actually set content approval status with a flow. All right, so let's talk about some common typical workflow requirements that you're going to want to use Flow for that request sign-off is not going to accommodate for. The first one is automatically getting the manager of someone. Knowing when someone's out of office when we send them an email or send them an approval flow. We can work with shared mailboxes, which means that we can have a specific mailbox that actually can send and receive flow automated emails. We can tie into content approval. Flow can also accommodate for overdue notifications, and of course, any outcomes other than approve or reject, because that approval action is only right now only has approve and reject as your outcomes. As we delve through all of these special actions that I want to highlight, I'm going to go ahead and create a new flow so I can show you those actions in action. I'm going to go ahead and just create a manually triggered flow for simplicity's sake for this demo. All right, the first action that I want to talk to you about is Get Manager. It is in the Office 365 Users connector. And as you can see here, there are a lot of different things we can do with profile properties and searching for users and getting information about people and everything in their profile. But there's specifically one called Get Manager, and all you do is tell it which user and to get the manager of that user. So in this case, I could say I want just the user that triggered this flow, and it will return me their manager. Next, I'll go ahead and show you the approvals action. The first thing to do is pick whether you'd like anyone, just one person from the list of people to be able to approve it, or if every single person that you send this to has to approve it. We'll call this test approval, and I can use that manager information to assign the approval to them. I could put more than one approver in this box. Requester is going to be who is the one requesting that approval. In this case, it will be the person who manually triggered the flow. And in the details, item link, and item description, that's where you'll be able to put detailed information that you want to be in the approval for them to be able to click to look at a document or click for further information. And your description, you can put a lot of information. You can put a lot of metadata from the document or item that you're sending to them. And the more information you put in this approval, the quicker and easier it will be for them to know what they're approving, to be able to see more information about it. Now, instead of doing this approval and using the whole approvals interface, you could delete this. Instead of using that, you could use the send email with options. It's a little different. It doesn't use the approvals interface at all. See, send email with options. And here's also where you're going to find send an email from a shared mailbox if you want your flow to send the emails so that the emails don't come from the person running the flow. All right, I'm going to send this to the manager. All right, so this email is going to send them options in an email to be able to click one. From there, you can make your workflow do different things depending on what option they selected. For example, I can use this thing called a switch. Switch is good when you have more than two options. Otherwise, a condition is good if you just have two different things they could pick from. But so I have selected option, which is what they click on, and if they choose, let's see, let me shrink this down. So you can make the workflow go down and actually do different things depending on what they pick, or you can just simply collect what their answer is and do something like write it to a SharePoint list or a spreadsheet. So that's how beneficial the email with options is, because you can make the options be whatever you want. And it's easy because they're just clicking a button in an email. All right, in this next pretty complex workflow, we're going to talk about the content approval setting, and we're going to talk about the concept of finding out if someone's out of the office or not. For this, I had to zoom way out on this monitor, so the big one. All right, when a file is created in the library, I'm going to initialize a variable and get the person's manager. Possibly there might not be a manager in Active Directory for this person. So if not, it's actually going to send a notification and the whole workflow is going to stop. That is done with what's called a run after in Flow. So if the workflow is failed, it's going to this branch and it's going to send an email notification, and it won't go and it won't do the rest of the workflow. All right, I'm going to set a variable, initialize the variable. Now I'm going to set it to whoever the manager is. Then I'm going to do an action called get mail tips for a mailbox. So this is basically finding out if the manager has their out of the box setting in their Outlook turned on or not. And all it's really doing in this condition is looking to see if their out of office message is empty or not. So this is a pretty complex little syntax here, but it's basically looking to see if the message is empty. If the message is empty, that means they are in the office. If it's not empty, that means they're out of the office. And we're going to, of course, depends on what your requirements are in your situation, but we're going to go ahead and say the backup person, if the manager's out, is their manager. So we're going to get the manager's manager. And then we're going to change that approval to variable to actually have both of those people in it, the manager and the manager's manager. And if there's no manager's manager, there's going to be a notification and it'll stop. Then it's pretty simple from there. We start an approval and we're using that approval to variable as the assign to. And of course, giving them a link to the item to approve. And this is where we're tapping into that content approval. So then before we actually decide, whether they approved it or not and change the content approval, we actually have to change the content approval to submit. See, it says action submit. Then we decide if they approve or not. So if their response in their approval is equal to approve, then it's going to do this content approval setting and set the content approval to approve. You can also add, send the person an email, whatever else you want it to do if it's approved. And if it is not equal to approved, it's going to set the content approval setting to rejected. All right, so we've encompassed how to work with a content approval in SharePoint and how to do something with that out of office and find out whether someone's out of the office or not. All right, so that just about wraps it up. This is a pretty short half-hour session. So your takeaways are: the request sign-off is new and very simple. Content approval is a list or library setting that lets you do moderation. Flows can do pretty much anything beyond that free-form. And I just wanted to thank you all for coming. Check out my SharePoint and Power Apps training site, IW Mentor. And thanks for coming to the conference.